Hello, everyone, and welcome to our monthly IBA stage event. We are really happy to have with us one of the most interesting new biennials, which has taken place in Prague since 2020, the Biennale Matter of Art. It's in its third edition this year. So Biennial Matter of Art was founded in 2020 by Transit to explore whether and how it is possible to do large-scale exhibition projects as political and institutional interventions. The first three editions, held in 2020, 2022, and 2024, helped to establish the Biennial as a space for voices and perspectives that are not often present or go unnoticed in the mainstream public discourse. Apologies for that. Even though they can offer lessons in resilience and solidarity. With us today to talk about the third edition of Biennial Matter of Art are Aleksei Borisionok, a curator, writer, and organizer who currently lives and works in Vienna. He's a member of the artistic research group Problem Collective and the Work Hard, Play Hard working group. He's currently fellow at the Veralist Center in New York, and he's joining us from Vienna, I believe. And he was one of the two curators of this year's Biennial. Also joining us from Vienna is Katalin Erdódi, who is a curator, dramaturg, and writer based in Vienna and Budapest. Her cross-disciplinary practice spans socially engaged art, experimental performance, and artistic intervention in rural and urban public spheres. As a curator, she has worked for the Steinischer Herbst in Graz, Brut in Vienna, and the GFZK Museum of Contemporary Art in Leipzig. Among others, she has co-founded the Platz Festival in Budapest, an international festival for site-specific performance and art in the public space. And she was recently appointed as the new director of Trafo House of Contemporary Art in Budapest, which she will start in 2025. Welcome, Aleksei. Welcome, Katalin. Also joining us from Prague are Frantisek Fekete, who has been one of the curators of the artist-run gallery 35 meters square since 2015. He has also worked as a curator with other art institutions such as the Academy of Fine Art in Prague, GAMU, the Brno House of Arts, and others, and is a collaborator of Transit. And Tereza Stejskalova, who is a curator, researcher based in Prague. She's the director of Transit and co-founder of the Biennial of Matter of Art. In 2017, she initiated the Feminist Art Institution, a coalition of cultural institutions in the Czech Republic and Slovakia around the Code of Praxis. And I'm very curious about this. Maybe we can, if it somehow fits the discussion, I'll ask more later. She collaborated on many exhibitions and projects across Europe, and she regularly publishes texts both within the academic sphere and non-academic journals, and is also editor in several publications. We're really happy to have all of you present today. It's great to have a variety of voices to represent the Biennial, and hopefully it will also give our viewers a diverse perspective of what it meant to create it and to put it in place and to also run it institutionally, let's say, and to observe what it does on the territory institutions. Given all of this presentation, I'm very happy to give Tereza and Frantisek the words to start, and we will see each other after the presentation for a short Q&A to go a bit deeper in some of the themes that emerged in the presentation itself.
So thank you for the welcome and for the invitation. We are very happy discuss our project here. So maybe we first off we will just like put a light on the background, the institutional background, and shortly summarize the history and etc. And then we give floor to the curators to present the current edition of the Biennial.
Mm-hmm. So let me just shortly introduce the organization tranzit.cz, who is the organizer of Biennale Matter of Art. So tranzit.cz is a non-profit organization which was founded in 2002. It's a part of Transit.org network, which is a network of 5 or 6 autonomous institutions working in different countries. So with Czech Republic, it's also Slovakia, Romania, Austria, Hungary, and that's it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so also important is with regards to that all these institutions are funded by Erdódi Foundation, which comes back to our biennial, because the biennial that we found, the first edition was in 2020, is a fundraise. It's a biennial that is we fundraise for each edition, but we have one stable partner, which is Erdódi Foundation.
Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, since its foundation from 2002, Transit organization was doing research, organizing small-scale exhibitions, having publishing activities, translating important books into the Czech, and have a gallery space, which was a transit display space, which is not now display gallery is already like also autonomous space, and so we are a non space organization. And Transit was also organizing lectures, workshops, and was a part of international collaborations. For example, co-curated Manifesta in 2010. Mm-hmm. But locally, it was rather like small scale events and exhibitions. But in 2019, there was an idea to starting to organize biennial, and so it was founded then, and then. Yeah, Tereza can continue.
Yeah, it was the aim was to kind of first to intervene into public institutions, because each edition we collaborated with a big public institution. We are a small non-profit organization, but with each edition we collaborate with this like a big institution. So the idea was to intervene into the big institution, because as you mentioned previously, Transit and also me, we were kind of involved with this feminist art institution code of practice. So the idea was how to also bring these feminist principles that we already kind of formulated and that we try to experiment with in our institution, how to bring them to bigger institutions. And also to like for us, the biennial is not like a means to it's not an end, but it's a means to an end. So it's more like a vehicle to maybe hack the institution of a biennial a bit. And to experiment with it a bit also with regards to the feminist principles. And
but also to get like the topics with which Transit was working to the wider public, some like more complicated topics like decolonization, etc. We can talk about it later as well.
So that the first edition was more local, because it was curated by me and my colleague Vidha Vranek, and it was also a COVID. It started during COVID, so it was not not many people came from abroad, etc. It was quite complicated, but it happened. And then from the but already the first edition happened in collaboration with the biggest city art museum. And then the second edition, there was an open call, an international open call for curators.
Mm-hmm. So upon this international open call, we selected actually 3 curators. It was Renan Laruan from Philippines, who is now a director of Save Contemporary in Berlin. Then Piotr Sikora, Polish curator based in Prague, a former curator of residency program at Meat Factory here in Prague. And Rado Istok, who then was based in Stockholm, but now is based in Prague, and he's one of the curators of modern art collection in National Gallery. And basically, from our point of view, it was this kind of social engineering that we put together these 3 curatorial concepts, which were kind of
curatorial strategies also.
and strategies, and put them together and kind of try to navigate this collaboration, even though the concepts were firstly kind of selected autonomously, but then we kind of put them together. So it was also this a bit institutional and also social kind of experiment. And this edition took place again at Prague City Gallery, but also there was an off-space venue, to put it this way, at the hospital, like Prague City Hospital in former Laundry. So again, this was an attempt to kind of bring the exhibitions out of the traditional exhibition space, which I think was very interesting. And the topic of the second edition was decolonization in Middle and Eastern Europe.
Central and Eastern Europe.
Central and Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm. So also this edition, the Transit was a curator of the second edition, and so we co-curated the edition. So before I give floor to the curators, I just explain a bit how like the principles or the kind of feminist approach that we have to biennales, if it's at all possible. But basically, in the beginning, we just set 3 basic principles that when we go to the public institution, this we make sure are like maintained. First is that the project is for free. So even though the institution itself charges for the projects, this project is for free. Second principle is as barrier-free as possible. So we collaborate only with institutions that can guarantee a barrier-free access. And then the third principle is that we don't support, or we just avoid volunteers or unpaid labor. So these three principles are sort of like very basic that are like no-go for us. And then there are some others that we always try to balance the local and the international. Like we always have everything translated both in the local language and in English, and other kind of accessibility principles that we might maybe come back later to Q&A. But yeah, that's it, or do we want to maybe something about also the Katalin and Aleksei to already slowly go there into the current edition. We again published an open call. And Katalin and Aleksei, they were they were among the curators who applied with proposals, and we again in our social engineering we again selected these 2 proposals, and we forced them to collaborate. No, I'm kidding, but we invited them to collaborate together. Yeah, so maybe we give you the floor now, Katalin and Aleksei, if you have nothing to add.
Thank you so much, Tereza and Frantisek, also for the introduction. We will share a presentation that we created together with Aleksei, Also, just especially to give you some visual impressions of the biennial, because we thought that that's definitely something important. And together with Aleksei, we will be also speaking one after another and introducing actually the biennial and the two curatorial focuses that we were working with, because perhaps a bit differently than in the case of the second edition, actually Transit invited us to work together, but to continue working on the curatorial proposals that we had submitted to the open call, and then find a way of bringing our curatorial interests together. So we will also tell you a little bit about that after introducing each of our interests. My interest was focusing on the question of rural change as social change, so very much concerned with looking at questions and struggles for social change from rural perspectives. And I think that this also echoes quite a bit with Transit's agenda in general with the biennial, to give space to voices that are underrepresented or for some reason or other missing from mainstream public discourse. And another aspect which is quite important from my perspective, and I also work very differently than as a curator than I did for the biennial as such, because usually I work in collaboration with artists, in close collaboration and on collaborative approaches. So another concern also within the biennial was how to give voices, for example, to the different rural communities or different rural places that we are talking about. And in terms of thinking about the rural, I think one aspect that is very important for me, as well as for the artists that I was collaborating with, is that the rural is not a monolith. So we definitely have to think about very heterogeneous and also fragmented realities and situated perspectives as well as knowledges. So then the question is, how do the artists find different strategies of giving voice to issues? We agreed with Aleksei that we will be kind of sharing our focus through the different also artistic projects, and especially the new commissions that we were working on. Altogether, just so that you have an overview, we had the chance to realize 8 new commissions, and as curators, we were working on 4 new commissions each. And one of my collaborations on new commission was together with the Czech artist and researcher Tomáš Unak, who then, with whom we brought together a larger group of artists to create a new project. So he collaborated with documentary filmmaker Asia Dél, Tamás Kaszás, who is a visual artist from Hungary, and Asunción Molinos Corto, an artist from Spain. All these artists have been working around the rural for quite some time, and they created a project together, which is called The Spectre of Peasantry. So of course, one aspect that we have to consider when talking about the rural is what kind of political identities, political subjectivities we are talking about, and especially because actually I would say we both focused on the broader Central East European region and post-socialist and post-Soviet context with our curatorial research primarily, not exclusively. So of course it was also a question, for example, who still identifies as a peasant in Czech Republic today. This was one of the driving forces of for Tomáš's work, and he then entered into dialogue with different ecological farmers working around the Czech Republic to actually explore with them this question using, and I think this is very important, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people living in rural areas, which many of us might think that it's a very old document, but it's actually very recent and was only adopted in 2018 after 20 years of struggle by the Via Campesina, which is the biggest social movement, one of the biggest social movements globally, and is a peasant movement. So I think these are some points that are important to mention. Another point that I already mentioned was the aspect of collaboration. And I think when we're talking about the challenges of working on the biennial, not only from curatorial and artistic perspectives, but also in collaboration with, for example, Transit and the Transit team. So definitely, for example, collaborative projects are a big challenge as they involve a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue, a lot of research, often a bit dead ends as well, that one only finds out that it's a dead end once one is quite deep into it. So actually also with the artists, especially, I mean, the ones invited for new commissions, we did quite a lot of field work, for example, with Alicja Rogalska, who is an artist from Poland, currently based in Berlin, who also created a new work for the Biennial called, actually she created two works. One of them is Propagate, a 3-channel video of which you can see some images here. And the other one is called Flowers of Resilience, which was a text-based installation. And these both works were created in collaboration with Platforma Vikvet, which is a platform for ecological flower farmers, with Jarmila Pejpalova, who is a florist, and Marie and Eliška Vejgrichtova, who are floristry teachers in a gardening school in Prague. So I think it was also important to have like a diversity of collaborators involved in many of these projects. And flower farming was also very interesting for us in terms of the feminist perspectives that one could explore, as in this field it's predominantly women working, and who, of course, then have their very specific perspectives also on the question of farming and agriculture and ecological change. I think also what was maybe as a last point in terms of Alicia's work important for her to consider was the flower as a political symbol, also in terms of movements such as socialism and feminism, and of course how these questions resonate in the local Czech context. Now I would like to also point to the works that were invited to the Biennial, and also how they dealt with this question of rural perspectives, and also very much the struggles that are happening in different rural places. So for example, Pinar Ögrenci, an artist originally from Turkey, currently based in Berlin, showed for the very first time in Europe her work Resisting Forest, which was created in 2019 for the Synod Biennial. And this is also, this resonates as well with this desire to consider feminist perspective in rural context, because she was focusing on the struggles of rural women in different parts of Turkey, who were opposing big development projects by the state and corporations to create hydroelectric plants. So another aspect, of course, in terms of the rural, is the question of the more than human, and not only the human perspectives, but also questions around resources such as water and, of course, land, and many different questions around more than human perspectives. And what was also interesting, that thanks to the space that we were working in, which is indeed not only one of the biggest institutions in the Czech Republic, but also the space itself was the Grand Hall of the National Gallery, which made possible a very, I mean, we will talk about it a bit later, very specific exhibition architecture, and also gave artists quite a bit of possibility to experiment with installing their work. Another work that I wanted to point to, which is also a new commission and was created by a Davra research group, represented in this case by Madina Yoldibek, Zomrad Mirzalieva, and Saudat Ismailova, also deals with the question of water and women and the use and both abuse of resources, but as well with more historical questions around agricultural modernization in the context of the Soviet Union, and especially focusing on the Central Asian region and the construction of the Great Fergana Canal, which made possible the large-scale industrialization of cotton production. And I think this work is actually, through the collaboration between the three artists, also opening up multiple perspectives, using multiple media and materialities to talk about these questions. And here you can see some other images of the work, and also how the contemporary state of the river, Sirdaria. And in this sense, also what's interesting to mention is that the installation that Davra created also follows the shape of the Sirdaria River, which was possible thanks to the space the Grand Hall and its possibilities. And I wanted also to point to a last work from, like, this is like a very small insight into some artists who we collaborated with for the biennial, but also in terms of like the question of more than human perspectives, but also the question of how do we reflect on the current state of affairs in terms of war and violence happening around us. We also collaborated with Katalin, who is an artist, both painter and writer from Ukraine, originally from the region of Luhansk, currently based in Kiev. And she creates one aspect of her practice is large-scale paintings which deal with the landscape that she had to abandon, she had to leave behind, and the question of how across such distance one can still relate to and also like articulate these attachments to the landscape, but also to talk about the violence and destruction, and also what this does not only to the humans who experience it, but also non-humans and landscapes. So this is just a small slice of all that we've been working on, and now I would like to give the word to Aleksei to share more about his curatorial focus.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you very much, Christian and IBA in general, for interest for Matter of Art. And I would like to mention that I think that's actually very fascinating how kind of this very kind of small scale biennials in Eastern Europe, and Transit is also part of the Eastern European Biennial Association, which includes quite similar platforms in Hungary as of Biennial, Kiev Biennial, which is happening in Kiev, but also Ukraine and outside of Ukraine because of the invasion recently, how actually they are able to kind of to generate a framework which helps to address not only on the local regional level, but also like in a more interesting way, a lot of problems, a lot of issues, kind of political life in general in those contexts. So of course it was a big interest and big pleasure to kind of to engage with this framework. As Katalin already mentioned, we tried also kind of to create a certain methodology out of the fact that we were invited separately with already like some kind of ideas about what we want to do. And we are also very glad that even though this collaboration always can be risky and quite challenging, but we were able to kind of to put together. And I would like to share briefly kind of my starting point and my interest, which is very much based on the fact that I'm coming originally from Belarus, Minsk, and it kind of like most of the things that I've been working on in the recent years were connected to the massive social uprising in Belarus 2020 with its very particular history, with an experience of political defeat, huge wave of repressions. But at the same time, the protests kind of in this very self-organized form generated a lot of ways of how people can resist and how they can resist depending on their kind of work and their leisure time. So during this protests, a lot of kind of interesting new forms of labor unrest, striking, self-organization were produced, which in many different ways shaped also my interest in this last few years. And my kind of proposal to the Biennial was connected to the way how changing landscape of work and leisure in Eastern Europe, or at the same time, which is more like kind of geographical notion, but also in the more as a temporal notion in something that we know as post-socialism, how those changing regimes of work have been informing also different ways of organizing, of living, of resting, and so on and so forth. So kind of based on this starting point, I'm showing the work of Vladimir Hramovich, artist from Belarus, who created this sculpture, which is actually reflecting this experience of political defeats in the different kinds of revolution and uprising, mostly connected to Belarus, but also goes beyond the kind of this nation-state borders. And both of the event that he's referring is this failed uprising in 2020, contemporary Belarus, but also anti-imperial uprisings in the late 19th century against Russian rule, Russian Tsarist rule, and which has a very particular history and connection to many revolutionary events across Europe and perhaps also even world, such as Paris Commune, but also many others. So he's speaking and referring to this strikes on main factories which are connected to salt and potassium extraction in Belarus, which are used massively in agriculture. So I think actually every work that we've been that are part of the exhibition actually could be read in many different ways, and they would kind of bring both of our interests in different perspectives. My primary interest was in general connected to the ways, as I said, like how the work is changing into this very specific notion of post-socialism, which does not mean a specific geographical interest. So it doesn't stand for kind of geographical or geopolitical interest, but rather refers to a certain method or a certain way how to read experiences of people which are connected to the failure of state socialisms and connected to the so-called transition time, when like social welfare being deregulated with different velocity, with different speed in different contexts, but at the same time kind of being also like in a very similar orbit and kind of like this very specific transformation. And of course, when we think about the work, it also includes all these larger perspectives on the way how outsourced labor works in Eastern Europe, how the work migration works, how labor being being kind of connected to algorithms and quite developed technical education and so on and so forth. So this particular work of artist from Georgia, Georgi Gagashidze, directly speaks about the experience of work migration of his father, while like from being highly educated engineer who had to work in the construction site in Portugal and who lost his arm on the construction site after 2008 crisis, and kind of coming back to Georgia. And this video essay speaks about the way how his lost hand, his lost arm is kind of being animated and being in conversation with the invisible hand of the market, speaking directly to this very particular form of transformation and the privatization and the so-called transition in post-socialist countries. I think this also will be a little bit more clear later when we speak about this kind of the way how we put together our perspectives, but the my research also led me to the questions connected to the not only to the workers' movements, trade unions, and various spontaneous prefigurative forms of organization, as well as workers' museums and so on, but also to different questions and notions connected to kind of the regeneration of workers, leisure time included, and also the questions of health. So this work is also one of the kind of refers to one of the threads of our interest connected to also like to notions such as prosthesis, workers' health, regeneration, grafting, and which we'll be speaking later on, and so on and so forth. Obviously, it kind of when we started to work and kind of discuss our interest in two of these topics, it of course in our context that was also kind of a provocation in many different ways. Also, as you can see in kind of in our logotype and visual identity, that of course it was also referring to this kind of alliances between workers' movements and the peasant movements, which we know from this socialist, post-socialist context as kind of very much connected to state, communist kind of organization. And that's true that in many cases, those alliances which were kind of put on the forefront, and of course we know they kind of symbolized in this hammer and sickle symbolism, being oftenly betrayed or failed, and but still we were very much interested in what actually this perspective can bring us in contemporary moment, both connected to the invisibility of agricultural labor, rural life in general, but also to the organized labor and kind of defeat of organized labor in most of the countries of Western and Eastern Europe. So, and here, just as an illustration, work of Prague-based Czech artist Martina Drosmutna, who is kind of studying in many different ways different representation of female labor during socialist times, but also post-socialist time, and kind of blending them in this very enigmatic, interesting images connected to women body, labor, but also some kind of extra labor situations which are presented in her paintings. One of the threads that I was interested in was connected to the museums, and more specifically museums of workers' movements, but also museums in broadly speaking. So I believe many of the artists with whom I was working on the new commission were referring to the museums in different ways. So just give you several examples. This is a work of Katalin, the artist from Ukraine, mostly painter, but also who works with painting in a more spatial way. She did research and kind of which was presented in this form and connected to the looted heritage, to looted artistic and ritual objects that ended up in the Imperial Museum, one of the largest imperial museums in Russia, in Hermitage, and the objects which were basically never shown and had a very different ways of coming there. And she puts those objects in the conversation on the questions on how past is being written, what is detachment of this object from the original context means, what is kind of this imperial shutter operating in the context which in the history of post-colonial, decolonial thinking were very rarely associated with imperialism, and the way, of course, how now we see with invasion how it's like really shows it in a very aggressive, vile way. The other work, which also directly spoke to the question of the museums and the way how revolutionary history being represented there, is a work by Czech artist Zbyněk Baladran. And I think that this is also through the history of Biennial Matter of Art in general, which was always a combination, which always tended to kind of to work with a combination of public institutions, of state institutions, but also with off spaces, with places which were previously not used or abandoned or kind of half used, or also places with very different purposes. This research started with kind of our inquiry into the Museum of Cooperative Association in Prague, which is very small, tiny museum that speaks about the history of cooperatives. And in this work, Zbyněk, he working with diagrams, maps, and different ways of interpreting history, including museum displays, is comparing different stories connected to the representation of revolutionary movements and also cooperative movements, which kind of he puts like this tension between them, and the way how museum displays are kind of have very limited capacity actually to speak to this revolutionary history, history of disruptions, history of uprisings. And maybe I start here and then I catch up some of the topics later on.
Okay, then maybe just to share a few words also, because we already mentioned it several times, like the question also of exhibition architecture. Aleksei mentioned the visual identity, which was actually created by the Rodina, a collective based in Amsterdam of post-conceptual designers, but actually also with the Czech origins. And the exhibition architecture was created by Dominik Lang and Adela Vavlikova. And of course, like as you can see, like we also wanted to share this like almost full image of the space to appreciate the fact of what was possible and what was not possible in this space. So this so-called Grand Hall of the National Gallery. It's important, maybe I will just mention shortly the history, because the National Gallery used to be the Trade Fair Palace, like this building of the National Gallery in Prague is called Trade Fair Palace, and it actually has a very important history which goes back to this golden era of cooperative movements that Aleksei already mentioned in the interwar period. It's one of like the emblematic examples of functionalist architecture, and it used to be like the main space where trade fairs were organized in the interwar period, and then later on during the state socialist period, it was like the main headquarters of different foreign trade companies. So it's also actually very much entangled in the different histories that we are talking about. And then after a fire, it became the space of the National Gallery as an exhibition space. Shortly, it was also considered whether it should become the Museum of Revolutionary Workers Movement, but in the end, it became the exhibition space of the National Gallery. And the Grand Hall itself was actually where the trade fairs used to be organized, especially also like different agricultural and industrial technology, and of course, large-scale machines. That is also why it looks so much like a machine hall. And that as it's protected heritage, so we were faced with the challenge of not being like able, for example, to fix anything to the floor, to the walls, etc. And this is like also one of the reasons that the exhibition architects proposed basically to work with the strategy of hanging. So everything is either hanging or standalone. And another important inspiration for the exhibition architecture was this idea of the exhibition as a landscape, mainly referring to landscape primarily in rural context, but nevertheless also inspired about the question of how we socially organize space. So the exhibition follows a little bit this logic of possible settlement, so to say, or in a certain case also referencing a bit like the spaces and non-places of a village as well. And a very important feature of the exhibition architecture are the lamp posts, so to say, which we often observe in different rural landscapes, also like and also connecting like different places, not only houses of a village, but also different villages and towns. And the lamppost was actually very important for us, both conceptually as well as functionally, because we also had to deal with the question of cables in the space. So actually the lampposts are functional in terms of connecting the artworks with the cables. But what we also felt was very beautiful when the architects proposed this idea was that actually the cables and the lampposts are also connecting the different works in space, because one of the main features of the exhibition is the transparency of the space. So we consciously decided not to build walls and not to create a space within a space, or only symbolically to mark and create some spaces. And therefore, like there is a constant interference between the different works, both visually as well as sound-wise, which is quite interesting. And it also has the aspect of a certain kind of playground, which also makes it perhaps more accessible to different age groups. And another element of the exhibition architecture was working with found material or borrowed material. So for example, the lampposts were specially built, but for example, everything that's marked in terms of the brick structure, etc., these are like borrowed from the construction industry, so to say. But there are also more historical elements, like the arc you can see, which is the actual arc of a greenhouse from the interwar period, which was kept by a friend of one of the architects. And perhaps I will also dive into the question of why we basically, when we were thinking about how to bring together the two curatorial approaches and researches, because I think also you can already sense that we were dealing with quite complex topics and issues. and actually at the same time with intentions of degrowth and descaling in terms of the strategy of for the biennial, like also the strategy that was proposed to us by Transit. So one aspect that we were thinking about was to bring grafting as a curatorial method. And then we very quickly found the art historical example that we are also sharing the image of Petr Stembera, and his actually performative, like documentation of his performative work, grafting Stepovani from 1975, when he actually attempted to graft a branch to his arm and then became intoxicated due to blood poisoning. But next to these art historical examples, actually, we also felt that grafting as such, like also both coming from agriculture as well as from the field of medicine, was very interesting for us, because actually it can happen. It happens actually both in like vernacular or like very traditional and indigenous forms of agriculture. So there is a large, like very long history of grafting, but it is of course also used in like industrial agriculture and agro-capitalist structures, and as well in medicine. Like grafting had been present for a very long time, and now of course in different areas of medicine. But what's interesting is that it's always done with this agenda of making something stronger. So you bring together these two different plant parts or human tissues, animal tissues, etc., trying on one hand also sometimes to repair, but also to make more resilient and more stronger. And this is something that perhaps also can be connected to what Aleksei was already mentioning, like this question of how we were also thinking about this history of both like peasant and workers movement and different alliances, and thinking that in the contemporary moment, why would it be relevant to, for example, try to do grafting, not only in its direct sense as it is being done, but also in terms of thinking about different like social movements and struggles that are happening around us, and how we can bring this together despite the differences. So this is also very interesting and important, that actually these plant parts are different plant parts. So it's not about bringing together that what is the same, but bringing together different elements. And another aspect which was important for us was also the element of failure, that you cannot guarantee the success of grafting. And perhaps from also thinking about like the possibility of technologies as well as mechanization and all these questions, even algorithmic thinking, actually grafting cannot be mechanized. Like it's still something that needs to be done manually, and actually requires like a very specific skill and precision. And now I would like to give the word to Aleksei to talk about how we thought about grafting solidarities.
One of the examples of this kind of historical spaces, and which appear to be the kind of the second location for the biennial, much smaller one, was a village of Lidice, which is a very particular place, and being kind of relatively well known back in the years due to the Nazi crime, Nazi massacre of village, mostly male residents, but also women, and when women and children were mostly sent to concentration camps and so on and so forth, due to kind of allegedly connection to the assassination of the protector of Moravia and Bohemia back in the 1942 Reinhenhandlich. So this place became quite well known internationally. It became one of the also like of this kind of symbols of anti-fascist solidarity, and specifically to its connection and its connection to mining areas in Czech Republic, and its connection to the UK miners' movements, and specifically one person, Sir Barnett Strauss, who was very much involved into making this Nazi crime very visible internationally, and was very much involved into the reconstruction of the city and also different solidarity gestures. So we were also interested specifically in how international solidarity and solidarity between very different struggles, different parts of the geographical parts can mean something today when it was historical, and how it can work. So Lidice became quite well known because of several things. I mean, after in the solidarity campaigns, and one of that, which I was mostly working with, what is an art collection, which became part of the newly reconstructed city, with a memorial on the space of the former village, of the old village, and the collection became very well known for various reasons, and most probably it became well known because of the involvement of German gallerist René Bloch, who from the 60s started to 3 times he brought works of very well-known German artists. Back then they were quite young, but still this collection, for example, quite like having quite a small physical space, they still have the works by Gerhard Richter, Josef Beuys, Rosemary Trockel, and so on and so forth, which is quite well-known fact. But at the same time, this collection was going through decades of different political kind of political regimes, which were also had a specific interest in this memory, very important memory side, and therefore the collection has a lot of works which were actually never shown to, from global South countries, from socialist and non-aligned countries, and so on and so forth. So we decided to use this chance also like to unpack several issues connected from one side to this notion of solidarity and its limitations, to the other side to the notion of landscape and the relationship between violence, trauma, landscape, body, and so on and so forth. And I was working with artist Nikita Kadan from Ukraine, who decided to work also with specifically this art collection when we found out that this collection has also one work from Ukrainian artist, Tetiana Yablonska, who was one of the most well-known socialist realist painters. And we invited him to, because of his previous experience working with different museum displays, to somehow work with a already existing collection. And he ended up creating this intervention into the public display, comprising the works from the collection. And he invited artists from Ukraine who would also speak to this broad problematics connected to war violence, history, and more specifically also kind of to this more dark and personal relation to war through the dreaming and kind of dreaming during the war times. So and in a similar way as René Bloch was bringing these works to back in Czechoslovakia in 60s, like with his van. So basically the criteria for him was that the works could fit. Nikita was also bringing these works, many of these works from Ukraine, in his backpack to the show. So it features kind of, it's quite a longer artist list here, but it's mostly like smaller works, photography, painting, drawings, which are speaking to his kind of idea and question about the dreaming during wartime. And in many ways also we were trying to kind of to create those connections, because of course with the topics which we were working, it's also quite complicated to do this project about also which focuses on rural context in the very center of Prague, in the National Gallery. So of course we were also thinking about different ways and different connections and how we can create them. And for example, in the case of Nikita, he decided also to show a series of his works. He calls them like forensic sculptures, but also with a small selection of paper works from Lidice art collection. And Lidice is based outside of Prague. It's not very far, but still it's already kind of out of the city. So we also brought some of the works back to the gallery.
Maybe just I will mention very shortly the other work that was, I mean, engaging with both the history of Lidice, but also its landscape and the memorial site itself was a new commission by Marta Popivoda with the title "What Lies Above Us in the Shadows Like a Black Cloud." And Marta, if maybe some of you know her practice is very much engaged with the landscape dramaturgy and also slow cinema, but also like reading, interested in what the landscape has to tell us about different historical events, different, so to say, layers of time, also how people engage with this landscape in different ways, because one of the aspects of the destruction that was done in Lidice was not only that the village itself was razed, but that actually afterwards, for 1.5 years during the war, the Nazis worked on really transforming the whole topography of the village and its basically environment. Not only making the village disappear as such, but also transforming the place to which later the survivors returned to. And then the decision was made during a socialist regime to keep the place of the village, the empty place of the village, so to say, as a negative landscape, as a memorial site, and to build, to rebuild the village a bit farther like this, and then there was created a very modernist, very socialist village actually, which is very unusual in a way, called New Lidice. And Marta was engaging with the landscape, but also in a dialogue with one of the last surviving Lidice women who is still living actually, or returned to Lidice, Jaroslava Skleničkova, and the title is one line of a poem that Jaroslava told Marta when she responded to the question of how she relates to the landscape of Lidice and of to the changes that it has experienced. And it's a poem written by an anti-fascist resistance fighter in Ravensbrück, with whom Jaroslava was together. So it was kind of interesting that even though Lidice itself, it's a symbol of anti-fascist solidarity, but it was not a symbol of anti-fascist resistance as such. But nevertheless, like in the way how, for example, Jaroslava reaches back to history, there is very much the notion of anti-fascist resistance. And I also wanted to share like this possible dialogue between different works of the exhibition and point to another art historical work by Zorka Saglova, which is called Tribute to Gustav Obermann, which also engages with this question of what resistance was possible during the Second World War, during the occupation of Czechoslovak territories. And Zorka Saglova and her friends paid tribute, so to say, to Gustav Obermann, who was a shoemaker who protested against German occupation by spitting fire and walking the hills of Humpolec. But I find it also very important, this collective gesture of both reenactment, speaking both to history, but as well in the period when Zorka Saglova did this performance, let's say, or landscape intervention. It was also very much speaking to the time of post-1968 in Czechoslovakia, because she created this work in 1970 at the point when she was exhibited or prohibited from exhibiting her work in institutions. So there are, of course, I think we find it important also to like point you to these different entanglements. And I think that we also wanted to share with you two last things, very short, about the Biennial Reader and Sowing Unrest, which is titled Sowing Unrest. Would you like to share a few words, Aleksei, and then thank you.
Yes, I think as also with many biennials, and of course it's not on this exhibition, and unfortunately our time is tight, so we were not speaking about many other threads and works in particular, but I think that's important to mention that besides the exhibition program, we also been working on the reader, which we saw as a kind of extension of the exhibition, and which puts together different essays, discussions, poems, and visual contributions by artists and researchers and writers, which kind of extend those topics. And for us, it was specifically important to do because also, as Tereza and Frantisek already mentioned, that we, like from the very beginning, we decided to go for a kind of like quite accessible way of reaching out to various audiences. And National Gallery in Prague is one of the touristic institutions where all kinds of people are visiting. So for us, it was important to have exhibition text and guide for the biennial written in a very simple language, So of course, from one perspective, it gives a different level of accessibility, but at the same time, of course, you also want to contextualize and to go deeper in certain aspects. So we used the reader in this way. And of course, Biennial is also a public program, and I think this is also something that we were very glad to work about, and the Biennial is going on. So in September, we have another series of public events of different kinds. And so we just wanted to show something that we've been working in June, and with an idea that obviously, we have a lot of events which are happening inside of National Gallery and Lidice art collection, which are mostly related to the artworks, to the guiding tours, to children workshops, and so on and so forth, which makes sense to do there. But according to our research, we were very much interested in extending public program and bringing people to these specific places of our interest, and which also makes sense for many of the artists, as for example, this event, Talking to the Sun, was organized together with one of the participating artists, Katarzyna Konvalinova, on the biodynamic farm outside of Prague, where we were trying to put a series of discussions, performances, conversations, but also more relaxing activities as workshops for children and like some resting time. And as, for example, another kind of small series of events which are called Uprooting Ill Health, which are more connected to the experience of kind of emotional and psychological problems such as burnout. And this event specifically was kind of going around where we had Hannah Proctor speaking about her recent book connected to the political history of burnout, and discussion with Tomasz Unek, one of the participating artists, and many more people on the issues of mental health of farmers, just to give you an example. And so in September, we also have several guiding tours, discussions, events in places of our interest, which we were also very much researching around, which is, for example, the Museum of Cooperative Association or Chemapol office, Chemapol building, which was one of the largest Czechoslovak companies responsible for import and export of agricultural goods. I don't know, Katalin, if you want to add here something.
No, maybe I will just show the last image, which is also a thank you for your attention, and with which we wanted actually to point to the fact that while the public program is partly discursive, but it's also often the site of hard work. And in this case, we were supporting the Garden of Institute of Anxiety, which was recently created at Bochnice Psychiatric Hospital with our gardening work, not only the two of us, but also together with the visitors who came to the event. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katalin. Thank you, Aleksei, Tereza, and Frantisek. It was a great, I think, overview of something that looks like a really big effort for a biennial such as a Matter of Art. And I have a number of questions, but I want to start by really thanking you for being here, especially because the biennial is ongoing. We often do these events just after a biennial finishes because we do know how much effort it takes to not only put up a biennial in terms of the exhibition itself, but the public program, and we know the importance of the public program itself. And it's actually great that you finished with pointing to some of the projects that you're doing in the public program, because that was one of the questions that I was writing down while you were talking. Especially thinking of this relation between urban and rural, and the fact that you mentioned that, of course, producing a show which is about the rural in central Prague is already, of course, poses some questions to the project itself. And so I'm really glad to see and happy that part of the public program does happen and does reconnect, let's say, to the site, let's say, of rural culture, of rural life in general. To go back to some of the other questions, I'll try to formulate one for all of you. Probably you will all have a slightly different approach to the answer. But as you mentioned, I'm sorry. As you mentioned during the presentation, the context of working within a biennial, within the context of Eastern Europe, and thank you, Aleksei, for mentioning the Eastern European Biennial Alliance, which is a group that we had actually contact with in the very first days or weeks after the invasion started, to try to communicate with them and try to understand what the situation was like and so on. So we're very aware of their work, and I think it's been a very important work in these past 3 years, at least, since their creation, since the creation of the alliance. But the question goes a bit further, and was like, I was wondering, within this context of Central and Eastern Europe, since you all have experience in working within, let's call them canonical institutions, galleries and museums and so on, and now the experience of the Biennial, I was wondering if you can give us a feel of what specifically the Biennial can offer, but also its limits. I think you pointed to both in this sense, in comparison with these other types of institutions. So to ask it in a different way, in what way can Biennial, or if Biennial are a different type of sites for knowledge production in the region? And of course, this includes also the limits of it. I understand that's part of it. And maybe I can ask you to start answering, Aleksei, because you did mention quite a few projects within your presentation, within your research, that builds on, I mean, apart from the work in Lidice, also a lot of the other projects that you mentioned had a relation between looking at museums and other kind of cultural institutions within the region. So I don't know. I'm leaving it up to you to decide who starts, but I thought that could be like a good starting point.
I can start answering, but that's true. I think that this question will have many different answers, and I believe that also even like inside of me there are many different answers and approaches to that. Because for me personally, I think it's actually still not a not a simple question. Also, like, why transit, and kind of knowing the history of transit, decided to run the Biennial. And I think it's also very interesting with the history of transit as network, where different organizations went into very different directions, let's say, in different ways. As for example, one of the Romanian transits simply decided to kind of withdraw from exhibition format and bought a piece of land and kind of started to work with cultural contemporary art and whatsoever means, but in different way. But I think Tereza and Frantisek, for me, also kind of, and of course work in general on the Biennial, started to give more and more answers and ideas about that. And I would say, first of all, I think that, and this is something that I'm very grateful for, and I'm sure that many of the artists would agree with that of course, Biennial creates a framework where you have much more time and resources to work on something in particular. So I would say that our time span was the kind of more rich than normally work span of the exhibitions in the galleries or museums can provide in some ways. Maybe not with all museums, but with many of them, I'm quite sure. So I think for me, that was personally also like speaking from the inside of curating, that of course it was very generous framework. And I believe I can't speak about also like this particular edition, but maybe speaking more broadly about also what many of those small scale independent non-for-profit biennials in Eastern Europe are trying to do is actually they have very different access, and not access, but they actually don't have so much access because they're not run by municipalities, they're not part of these policies in the cities connected to tourism or something like that. So they actually have very limited resources. And I'm sure that Tereza Frantisek can share also like and we all know who've been working how complicated and hard economy is in different ways. But at the same time, they have different angle and the approach to both public and public institutions and city space, public space, and also kind of have more capacities, I think, to engage with all kinds of spaces, not only art related, but also many others.
Anybody else wants to contribute? Or
maybe I would shortly reflect on your comment, Christian, actually about I mean, also about this relationship between the rural and urban, and why it is actually, I think, very important to occupy spaces that offer you to become center of attention. So I think that also, like, that was something that I was trying to point to, like that in terms of the process, like both the artistic research, but then also the production, like a lot of these works were going in between and across like different rural and urban context, and definitely like there is a very strong dialogue there that was informing the works that talk about questions around rural change, etc. But I think that actually in terms of what the biennial can do, and what it can also do in terms of for focuses that are like perhaps engaging with this question of underrepresented, I don't know, voices or issues also, or perspectives, it is actually to occupy center stage. So in that sense, I think it's very important to open up this public space within the National Gallery, within the Grand Hall. And because this was my experience also from collaborative processes, at least most of our collaborators, especially coming from different villages and rural places, they were not so interested in sharing the collaboration in their local context, often for different reasons, of course, also because, I mean, you often talk about issues that are very controversial in the local context, but there was a huge interest of bringing these projects and collaborations to stages where they can become a center of attention. And I think for me, what is interesting in the biennial form, although I don't know if that speaks particular, I mean, I think it does speak to the particular form of like large scale exhibitions. Oh, I think I got
You're okay.
frozen.
Don't
Am
worry.
I okay? Okay, because I seem to be frozen. Is actually this possibility to be very plurivocal and to offer a complexity of perspectives that like visitors can encounter within the exhibition. And I think for me, this is actually something quite precious, and I think something that is also important to insist on when curating a biennial, that there is like a very, I mean, consciously, there is a plurality of voices that we can encounter and engage with. I hope you can still hear me. I still seem to be frozen.
All looking good from our side.
Okay, perfect.
Maybe
Yes,
we just add with regards to the relationship between museums and biennales. As Aleksei noted, the situation of our biennale is very different from, let's say, more kind of financially stable, other biennales, let's say, in other parts of the world. But I would say as I mentioned earlier, one of our aims was to intervene in public institutions, to actually influence or change the way big museums or bigger institutions are run. So for us, the Biennale was precisely a vehicle how to bring some ideas around visual culture with regards to accessibility, with regards to inclusivity, with regards to also different hierarchies in institution. Because, for instance, just to give you a very particular example, there is a very strict hierarchy usually in bigger institution between the educational department and mediation departments and the curators. And in our, as already Katalin and Aleksei mentioned, this like the publications that we produced, the guide of the exhibition was very we had this aim that it should be written not in an language of an expert, but accessible language. Yeah, so we had a certain idea that we sort of sit down with the curators and we discuss this a lot. And also we try to bring some like a kind of mediation ideas, or like we wanted to be part of the discussion. So usually in bigger institution, my experience is that the curators just hold the concept and the concept rules everything. But I think we try to experiment with this a bit, like how you know, there can be more dialogue between, I don't know, the educational or the accessibility aspect and the curatorial concept. Thank you.
Maybe building on this, but I want to build on what you just said and at the same time ask something else. I'll start by building on what you just said because it makes more sense, which is given what you just said, and I think the notion that you mentioned of the hierarchy between curatorial and educational or mediation, or depending on how they're named, departments, let's say in museums and in other galleries, it's definitely present. It's undeniable. And often also in other biennials, to be honest. So I think it's interesting to try to challenge that. And given that you were working in two spaces, which I assume are quite different institutions, the gallery in Lidice and the National Gallery in Prague, maybe can you give us a sense of how this interaction worked also with the institution that was hosting you? Because I guess that's also a mediation which is complicated sometimes and which can take some time to.
I don't know if you guys want to say something. we should. I mean, of course, big institutions, I would put it like this. Big institutions are also not one person, you know, they're complicated and you communicate with different departments. And so I would say it's just different. So for example, the National Gallery has a really great educational department with whom we quite had meetings and had really enriching conversations. Of course, the collaboration with Lidice Gallery was very different because it's also a small institution. So they were much more flexible and much the collaboration was smoother, of course, than with a giant museum with many collections, etc. So that was the difference. But I would say it requires a lot of diplomacy. But then when you connect with particular people who understand, you know, because you also the big institutions, that there's singular individuals who might have dreams, but sometimes the institution is rigid for them to realize, and sometimes you can create a dialogue and you can support them, or they can support you. So yeah, I would say that's how it works.
Yeah, maybe I would just add from mine a kind of a practical point of view as I did the production of it. So I think like these big institutions have these like rigid structures, but the people who are working there, they are not sometimes like responsible for the structure. They are just following these like rigid rules and kind of requirements, and they are responsible for something, but there are people above them, under them, etc., etc. So I think it's always about this like negotiations about something, you know, that like we want something, but it's not that easy because, you know, there is this rule, etc. But I think these negotiations are also useful for like
both sides.
For both sides, you know. So like we, for example, got warnings that like I don't know, this department is very strict with something, but then the people themselves are actually quite like you know, open to be in dialogue and kind of yeah. So but it's always, I think, different layers of negotiating, and also with different departments, starting from the beginning to kind of talk with the leadership, and then kind of coming down to the really like
The real people.
the real people who are like kind of dealing with the practical, like everyday stuff, like security, you know, and you always like talk to these people, and they have their own kind of daily lives, etc., etc. And it's always, I think, also inspiring, you know, to meet these people, even though it's not always easy. Yeah. So that's from my point of view.
Of course. Yeah, I think probably many people that are listening and have any experience of running a biennial know that that's part of the daily work and mediation of running an institution that doesn't have its own space, let's say. I've had written down actually quite a few other questions, but I see that we're running quite late already. We usually try to keep it within an hour. We're about an hour and a half. So I think I will try to close it here instead of continuing discussion, but I do, of course, encourage, as we always do, our viewers, both now and later, to reach out to us so we can redirect questions specifically on the presentation that might emerge now or later. Yeah, I want to take a moment to, of course, encourage everyone that is planning to travel to Prague to visit the show. I think it is open still until the 29th of September, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, follow both social media and website of the Biennial to know about the public program as well, in case you're around for any of those events. And yeah, I really want to thank you all for contributing to today's discussion. I think it was a really it was a good presentation, and I think we had a chance of at least talking about some of the aspects that emerged, which were important. And of course, we are looking forward for each of your new projects to come, and of course, wish you a really great ending for this project, first of all. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your invitation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.